Are you losing weight, but your belly still feels hard, bloated, and impossible to shrink? What if the most dangerous fat in your body isn't the fat you can see, but the fat surrounding your organs right now? Because here's what's really going on inside your body. Not all body fat behaves the same way. Subcutaneous fat is the fat stored under the skin, but visceral fat is different. Visceral fat surrounds vital organs like the liver, pancreas, intestines, heart, and metabolically, visceral fat is highly active. In fact, many scientists now view visceral fat almost like an inflammatory organ itself. It releases inflammatory compounds that can influence insulin resistance, hormones, blood sugar, liver health, energy levels, cardiovascular risk, brain function. That's why someone can appear normal weight externally, but still carry dangerous levels of visceral fat internally. And this matters because chronic inflammation and visceral fat are deeply connected. One often drives the other. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine visceral fat like a factory producing inflammatory smoke inside the body 24 hours a day. The more visceral fat accumulates, the more inflammatory signaling spreads through the metabolic system. Over time, this can affect nearly every major organ. And one of the biggest problems in modern health is that many people are constantly feeding the biological conditions that help visceral fat grow. Things like excess sugar, ultra-processed foods, poor sleep, chronic stress, constant snacking, sedentary lifestyles, blood sugar spikes. Now here's the encouraging part. Visceral fat is also highly responsive to lifestyle changes. In many cases, it can decrease faster than subcutaneous fat when the body becomes metabolically healthier. And one of the most powerful tools isn't extreme dieting. It's strategic nutrition, because certain foods influence insulin sensitivity, inflammatory pathways, gut bacteria, satiety hormones, fat metabolism, oxidative stress. In other words, some foods help create biological conditions where visceral fat becomes harder to maintain. That's powerful. In today's video, we're going to break down what visceral fat actually is, why inflammation keeps it growing, the hidden role of insulin resistance, and 5 powerful foods you should consider eating consistently to help support fat burning and reduce inflammatory stress naturally. Now, this is important. These foods are not magic cures. No single food melts fat overnight. But what the research shows is that repeated nutritional signals shape metabolism over time. And small, consistent habits often create massive long-term physiological change. We'll also discuss meal timing, gut health, sleep, stress hormones, blood sugar regulation, and why some healthy foods may actually worsen visceral fat in certain people. Because once you understand the root causes driving inflammation and metabolic dysfunction, you stop chasing quick fixes, and you start working with your biology instead of against it. If this kind of science-based health content is helpful to you, consider subscribing, because every week we break down complex metabolic science into practical strategies people can actually use in daily life. Because reducing visceral fat isn't just about appearance. It's about protecting your metabolism, brain, heart, liver, hormones, energy, and long-term healthy aging. One of the most powerful ways to begin reducing visceral fat naturally is by stabilizing insulin levels and lowering inflammatory stress at the same time. And that starts with the first category of foods many people underestimate completely: fiber-rich foods. Because here's what's really going on inside your body. Most people today are dramatically overfed but undernourished. They consume large amounts of calories from ultra-processed foods while getting very little fiber, very little micronutrition, and very poor blood sugar regulation. And this creates the perfect biological environment for visceral fat accumulation. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your bloodstream like a highway. When refined carbohydrates and sugar enter rapidly, it creates a metabolic traffic surge. Blood sugar spikes quickly, insulin rises sharply, and the body shifts into storage mode. Over time, repeated insulin spikes encourage more visceral fat storage around organs, but fiber changes that entire process. Fiber slows digestion and glucose absorption. Instead of a sudden metabolic surge, energy enters the bloodstream more gradually and predictably. That means smaller glucose spikes, lower insulin demand, better satiety, less inflammation, improved metabolic flexibility. Fiber, glucose, spikes plus insulin plus visceral fat, up arrow, fiber, and right arrow. Each down arrow, glucose spikes plus and down arrow, insulin plus and down arrow. Visceral, fat, fiber, glucose, spikes, insulin plus visceral fat. Now here's something many people don't realize. Fiber also feeds beneficial gut bacteria, and your gut microbiome plays a major role in inflammation, appetite regulation, fat storage, blood sugar control, hormone signaling. When beneficial bacteria ferment certain fibers, they produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. And butyrate may help reduce inflammatory signaling, improve gut barrier integrity, support insulin sensitivity, influence fat metabolism positively. Again, everything is connected. Now, some of the best fiber-rich foods for metabolic health include lentils, beans, chia seeds, flax seeds, oats, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, leafy greens, berries. And berries deserve special attention because berries provide both fiber and powerful polyphenols. Polyphenols are natural plant compounds associated with healthier inflammatory signaling and oxidative stress reduction. Foods like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries have relatively low glycemic impact compared to many processed snacks while delivering enormous nutritional value. Now, another major advantage of fiber-rich foods is satiety. Ultra-processed foods are often engineered to bypass natural fullness signals, but whole foods containing fiber and water naturally help regulate appetite. That's important because many people struggling with visceral fat are unknowingly trapped in cycles of blood sugar crashes, cravings, frequent snacking, energy instability, and every spike crash cycle places additional pressure on insulin regulation. Now let's talk specifically about oats for a moment. High-quality oats contain beta-glucans, a type of soluble fiber associated with improved cholesterol regulation, better satiety, healthier blood sugar response. And stable blood sugar is one of the most important factors in reducing visceral fat accumulation. Now here's another key point. The goal is not eliminating all carbohydrates. The goal is improving carbohydrate quality. Whole food carbohydrates behave very differently from refined processed carbohydrates. For example, lentils, beans, vegetables, intact whole grains, berries contain fiber, nutrients, and slower digestion patterns. Meanwhile, sugary cereals, white bread, soda, pastries, candy, processed snack foods create rapid glucose spikes with little satiety or nutritional support. That distinction matters enormously metabolically. Now, another important factor is meal composition. Combining protein, fiber, healthy fats helps stabilize glucose responses far more effectively than eating refined carbohydrates alone. For example, compare sugary cereal for breakfast versus eggs, berries, oats, and chia seeds. Completely different hormonal response, completely different satiety response, completely different metabolic impact. Now, one overlooked habit that dramatically improves blood sugar control is walking after meals. Even short walks help muscles absorb circulating glucose more efficiently, reducing insulin demand. Again, visceral fat reduction is not about starvation. It's about improving metabolic communication inside the body. And fiber-rich whole foods are one of the most powerful ways to begin shifting that internal environment naturally. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing, because understanding the biology behind inflammation, insulin, and fat storage gives you practical tools to support long-term metabolic health naturally. Now let's move to the second category of foods that may dramatically help reduce visceral fat and calm inflammation naturally. Healthy fats rich in anti-inflammatory compounds. Because one of the biggest nutritional myths for decades was the idea that eating fat automatically makes you fat. But here's what's really going on inside your body. The body's hormonal response to food matters far more than simplistic calorie math alone. And many highly processed low-fat foods actually worsen insulin resistance and visceral fat accumulation because they are loaded with refined starches, added sugars, industrial additives, rapidly absorbed carbohydrates. Meanwhile, certain natural fats may help improve satiety, stabilize blood sugar, and reduce inflammatory stress. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your metabolism like a campfire. Refined carbohydrates are often like dry paper. They ignite quickly, burn rapidly, and disappear fast, creating unstable energy and repeated hunger. But healthy fats combined with protein and fiber burn more steadily, helping create longer-lasting metabolic stability. That stability matters enormously for visceral fat reduction. Now, one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory foods is extra virgin olive oil. And what the research shows is fascinating. Extra virgin olive oil contains polyphenols and monounsaturated fats associated with reduced inflammatory signaling, improved endothelial function, better insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular protection. This is one reason Mediterranean-style dietary patterns are consistently associated with healthier metabolic outcomes and reduced visceral fat risk. Now, another incredibly powerful category is fatty fish, especially salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies. These fish contain omega-3 fatty acids that help regulate inflammatory pathways, and chronic inflammation is one of the major biological drivers of visceral fat accumulation. Inflammation plus insulin, sensitivity, visceral fat down arrow, inflammation plus new arrow. Insulin, sensitivity, a right arrow, down arrow. Visceral fat inflammation. Insulin, sensitivity, visceral fat. Now this is important. Visceral fat itself releases inflammatory compounds, so inflammation and visceral fat often feed one another in a vicious cycle. The more inflammation rises, the easier fat storage becomes. The more visceral fat accumulates, the more inflammatory signaling increases. Breaking that cycle is critical, and anti-inflammatory foods help shift the internal environment in a healthier direction. Now let's talk about avocados. Avocados are rich in fiber, potassium, monounsaturated fats. This combination supports satiety and metabolic balance remarkably well. Many people notice fewer cravings and more stable energy when replacing processed snacks with whole food fat sources like avocado. Now, another important category is nuts and seeds, especially walnuts, almonds, chia seeds, flax seeds. These foods provide combinations of healthy fats, fiber, minerals, plant compounds. And despite being calorie-dense, research often associates moderate nut consumption with healthier body composition and metabolic outcomes. Why? Because satiety and hormonal response matter. Whole foods naturally regulate appetite far better than ultra-processed foods. Now here's another fascinating connection. Healthy fats also influence the brain. The brain is highly dependent on stable energy and healthy cellular membranes, and unstable blood sugar combined with chronic inflammation often contributes to cravings, fatigue, brain fog, mood instability. This is why metabolically balanced meals often improve mental clarity as well. Again, everything is connected. Now let's discuss one of the most damaging fats in the modern food supply. Industrial ultra-processed oils found in many packaged foods and deep-fried products. When combined with refined carbohydrates and excess calories, these foods may contribute heavily to inflammatory stress and metabolic dysfunction, especially fast food, deep-fried snacks, processed desserts, packaged pastries, highly processed restaurant foods, and importantly, many people consume these foods while remaining physically inactive and sleep-deprived, amplifying metabolic stress even further. Now, another overlooked factor is breakfast quality. Many breakfast foods marketed as healthy are essentially desserts metabolically. Sugary cereal, sweetened yogurt, pastries, flavored coffee drinks. These create rapid glucose spikes that often lead to energy crashes and cravings later in the day. Meanwhile, a breakfast built around protein, fiber, healthy fats creates a completely different hormonal environment. For example, eggs with avocado, Greek yogurt with berries and chia seeds, oats with flax seeds and nuts. These meals stabilize appetite far more effectively. Now, one important point, the goal is not extreme dieting or fear of food. The goal is improving food quality consistently enough that the body no longer receives constant inflammatory and insulin spiking signals. And when that internal environment improves, visceral fat often becomes far more difficult for the body to maintain. Now let's talk about the third powerful category of foods that can help reduce visceral fat and calm inflammation naturally. Fermented foods and microbiome-supporting foods. Because here's what's really going on inside your body. Your gut microbiome influences far more than digestion. It affects inflammation, blood sugar regulation, hormones, appetite, immune signaling, fat storage, even stress responses. And modern lifestyles often damage microbial diversity through ultra-processed foods, excess sugar, chronic stress, poor sleep, sedentary behavior, frequent antibiotic exposure. When microbial balance becomes disrupted, inflammation often increases, and chronic inflammation creates an environment where visceral fat thrives. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your gut bacteria like an internal ecosystem. In a healthy ecosystem, beneficial species help maintain balance and communication. But when diversity declines, inflammatory organisms may dominate, creating metabolic instability throughout the body. That instability influences much more than digestion. Now, this is where fermented foods become fascinating. Fermented foods naturally contain beneficial microorganisms and compounds produced during fermentation. Examples include yogurt with live cultures, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh. And what research increasingly suggests is that healthier microbial diversity is associated with better metabolic flexibility, improved insulin sensitivity, reduced inflammatory signaling, healthier body composition, healthy microbiome, inflammation plus metabolic flexibility, healthy microbiome, and right arrow, X down arrow, inflammation plus up arrow, metabolicin, flexibility, healthy microbiome, inflammation plus metabolic flexibility. Now here's an important distinction. Fermented foods are not magic solutions by themselves. You cannot out-supplement a chronically inflammatory lifestyle. If someone sleeps poorly, eats ultra-processed foods constantly, lives under chronic stress, never moves their body, adding probiotics alone is unlikely to fully reverse metabolic dysfunction because the microbiome responds to patterns, not isolated shortcuts. Now, another critical category is prebiotic foods. Prebiotics are fibers that beneficial bacteria feed on. And without proper fuel, beneficial bacteria struggle to thrive. Some of the best prebiotic-rich foods include garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, oats, lentils, beans, green bananas. These foods nourish beneficial microbes that produce compounds like butyrate. And butyrate may help reduce inflammation, improve gut barrier integrity, support insulin sensitivity, influence appetite regulation. Again, everything is connected. Now here's something many people overlook. An unhealthy gut may increase intestinal permeability, sometimes referred to as leaky gut. When the gut barrier becomes compromised, inflammatory compounds may enter circulation more easily, placing additional stress on the liver, immune system, metabolism, hormonal balance. This is one reason gut health and visceral fat are so closely linked. Now let's talk about one of the most overlooked inflammatory triggers, liquid sugar. Sugary beverages not only spike insulin rapidly, but may also negatively influence microbial diversity over time, especially soda, sweetened coffee drinks, energy drinks, excess fruit juice. And because liquid calories bypass many natural satiety mechanisms, people often consume large amounts very quickly. Now, another fascinating connection is the gut-brain axis. Certain gut bacteria influence neurotransmitter pathways and stress signaling. This matters because chronic stress itself promotes visceral fat accumulation through elevated cortisol. So when the microbiome becomes healthier, some people also notice improved digestion, better energy, reduced cravings, more stable mood, better appetite regulation. Now let's make this practical. A microbiome-supportive daily routine might include fiber-rich vegetables, fermented foods, polyphenol-rich foods, reduced processed sugar, better sleep, daily movement. Simple habits, but biologically powerful. And importantly, consistency matters far more than perfection. The microbiome adapts continuously to repeated behaviors. Now, one major mistake people make is constantly changing diets without giving the body time to adapt. Extreme restriction often creates stress rather than metabolic stability. Instead, gradual sustainable improvements tend to support healthier long-term outcomes. Now, another important point, inflammation itself changes hunger signaling. Many ultra-processed foods are engineered to override fullness cues, making overeating easier. Meanwhile, whole foods containing fiber, protein, healthy fats, natural food structure support satiety much more effectively. That means fewer cravings, more stable blood sugar, less insulin demand, and over time, reduced visceral fat storage. Again, the goal is not punishing the body. The goal is restoring biological balance. And when the gut, metabolism, and inflammatory systems begin communicating more effectively again, the body often becomes far more efficient at regulating fat naturally. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful and underrated foods for reducing visceral fat and calming inflammation, green tea. Because what makes green tea so fascinating is that it doesn't work through a single mechanism. It influences multiple metabolic pathways at the same time. And here's what's really going on inside your body. Now here's something important. Green tea is not a fat-burning miracle. No beverage overrides poor sleep, ultra-processed food intake, chronic stress, and inactivity. But metabolically, small supportive signals repeated consistently matter. And green tea may help support those healthier signals. Now, another fascinating aspect of green tea is its relationship with insulin sensitivity. Some studies suggest green tea compounds may modestly support healthier glucose metabolism and inflammatory regulation. Again, not magic, but potentially supportive as part of a larger metabolic strategy. Now let's talk about timing. Many people benefit from replacing sugary beverages with green tea, sparkling water, black coffee, unsweetened herbal tea. Why does this matter? Because sugary drinks are one of the fastest ways to increase visceral fat accumulation. Liquid sugar enters rapidly, spikes insulin aggressively, and provides very weak satiety. Meanwhile, replacing those beverages with low-sugar alternatives immediately reduces metabolic burden. And over time, those repeated decisions compound significantly. Now, another powerful category closely related to green tea is polyphenol-rich foods overall, especially berries, dark leafy greens, cocoa, herbs and spices, pomegranates, extra virgin olive oil. Polyphenols interact with gut bacteria, inflammatory pathways, oxidative stress systems, blood vessel health. And interestingly, the microbiome helps metabolize many polyphenols into bioactive compounds. Again, the gut and metabolism are deeply connected. Now let's discuss one of the biggest overlooked drivers of visceral fat: chronic blood sugar instability. Many people experience repeated glucose spikes and crashes all day long from sugary breakfasts, processed snacks, sweetened drinks, constant grazing, and every spike crash cycle often triggers more hunger, more cravings, more insulin release, more inflammatory signaling. That metabolic chaos makes visceral fat extremely difficult to reduce. This is why stable meals matter so much. Meals centered around protein, fiber, healthy fats, whole food carbohydrates create a completely different hormonal environment. Now, another important point: stress eating is not simply about lack of willpower. Chronic stress changes hormonal signaling. Elevated cortisol often increases cravings for sugar, processed foods, highly rewarding snacks. And those foods temporarily stimulate dopamine pathways while worsening inflammation long term. This is why stress management itself becomes a visceral fat reduction strategy. Now, one incredibly effective habit many people underestimate is simply slowing down while eating. Eating too quickly often disrupts satiety signaling. Meanwhile, eating slowly improves digestion, awareness, portion regulation, blood sugar response. Simple behavioral shifts can have surprisingly powerful metabolic effects over time. Now, another overlooked factor is hydration. Even mild dehydration may increase fatigue and hunger signaling in some people. And many sugary beverages are consumed not from true hunger, but from habit, stress, or poor hydration patterns. Now, let's make this practical. One simple anti-inflammatory daily routine could look like morning green tea, fiber-rich meals, protein at each meal, reduced sugary beverages, walking after meals, earlier dinners, better sleep consistency, nothing extreme, but metabolically transformative over time. Because visceral fat reduction is not about punishing the body. It's about creating an internal environment where inflammation decreases, insulin improves, and fat storage becomes biologically less favorable naturally. Now let's talk about the fifth and perhaps most powerful category of foods for reducing visceral fat and lowering inflammation naturally: protein-rich whole foods. Because here's what's really going on inside your body. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with cravings, overeating, unstable energy, and stubborn belly fat is that their meals fail to regulate satiety hormones effectively. And protein plays a central role in that regulation. In fact, protein influences appetite hormones, muscle preservation, blood sugar stability, metabolic rate, insulin response, recovery pathways, and all of these directly affect visceral fat accumulation. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your metabolism like a rechargeable battery. Ultra-processed foods create quick surges of energy followed by rapid crashes. But protein provides a steadier metabolic signal that supports longer-lasting energy and satiety. That stability becomes extremely important for controlling insulin and reducing inflammatory eating patterns. Now, this is critical to understand. Visceral fat thrives in unstable metabolic environments. Repeated blood sugar spikes, constant cravings, chronic overeating, low muscle mass, inflammation, sedentary behavior. These conditions create the perfect storm for abdominal fat storage. Now, another major benefit of protein is muscle preservation. And muscle tissue is metabolically powerful. Muscle acts almost like a glucose reservoir. The more healthy muscle mass you maintain, the better your body becomes at managing blood sugar, utilizing glucose, improving insulin sensitivity, burning stored energy efficiently. This is why resistance training combined with adequate protein intake is one of the most effective long-term strategies for reducing visceral fat. Not because of calorie burning alone, but because it improves metabolic communication at the root level. Now let's talk about some of the best whole food protein sources: eggs, fish, Greek yogurt, lentils, beans, chicken, tofu, tempeh, cottage cheese. And one important point: protein quality matters, but meal balance matters too. Combining protein, fiber, Healthy fats creates a much healthier metabolic response than eating refined carbohydrates alone. For example, pastry and sweet coffee for breakfast versus eggs, berries, and chia seeds. Completely different hormonal environment. One spikes glucose rapidly and crashes quickly. The other stabilizes blood sugar and supports satiety for hours. Now here's another fascinating connection. Protein also influences something called the thermic effect of food. In simple terms, the body uses more energy digesting protein compared to many processed carbohydrates. Again, this is not magic, but metabolically, it contributes to a healthier energy balance over time. Now, another overlooked factor in visceral fat accumulation is sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. As muscle mass declines with aging, insulin sensitivity often worsens. That means blood sugar regulation becomes harder, fat storage becomes easier, energy expenditure decreases. This is one reason maintaining muscle becomes critically important for healthy aging and metabolic resilience. Now let's connect this to inflammation. When people consume highly processed diets low in protein and nutrients, they often experience frequent hunger, poor recovery, increased cravings, blood sugar instability, elevated inflammatory stress. And inflammation itself may worsen hormonal regulation and appetite signaling. Again, the systems are interconnected. Now, another important issue is emotional eating. Many people are not eating because of true biological hunger. They're responding to stress, fatigue, sleep deprivation, dopamine-seeking behaviors, blood sugar crashes. This is why simply telling people to eat less often fails long-term. The body's hormonal environment matters. Stable blood sugar matters. Satiety matters. Sleep matters. Stress matters. Now let's talk briefly about ultra-processed health foods. Over time, visceral fat begins influencing liver function, blood sugar regulation, cardiovascular health, hormonal balance, brain function, energy production. And this is why many people feel exhausted, inflamed, hungry, and metabolically stuck even when they're trying hard to lose weight. But the encouraging news is this. Visceral fat is highly responsive to lifestyle change, and often the body begins improving faster than people expect once the biological environment changes. That's why the foods we discussed today matter so much. Fiber-rich foods, healthy fats, fermented foods, green tea, protein-rich whole foods, not because they are miracle cures, but because they influence the systems driving inflammation and metabolic dysfunction at the root level. Let me explain this with one final analogy. Think of your metabolism like a thermostat. Every daily habit sends instructions telling the body whether to store fat, burn energy, increase inflammation, improve recovery, stabilize hormones, repair tissues. And over time, repeated signals shape the internal environment you live in every single day. That means one healthy meal matters, one walk matters, one night of better sleep matters, one less sugary drink matters. Because biology responds to repetition. Now, another important truth, you do not need extreme diets to improve metabolic health. In fact, sustainable improvements often work better long-term because the body adapts to consistency. Simple habits become powerful when repeated daily. Prioritizing whole foods, stabilizing blood sugar, building muscle, walking after meals, reducing processed foods, improving sleep, managing stress, supporting gut health. These are not trendy hacks. They are biological fundamentals. And when those fundamentals improve, many people notice better energy, reduced cravings, improved focus, better digestion, easier fat loss, smaller waist circumference, more stable mood. Not because of a single magic supplement, but because the body is finally functioning more efficiently again. Now here's my challenge for you. Choose one food from today's video and start incorporating it consistently this week. Maybe add berries to breakfast. Replace soda with green tea. Eat more fiber-rich vegetables. Add fermented foods. Increase protein at breakfast. Then pay attention to how your energy, cravings, digestion, and hunger begin changing over time. Because when you improve the quality of the signals entering the body often responds remarkably well. And remember, healthy aging is not built through occasional extreme efforts. It's built through small biological advantages repeated consistently for years. If this video added value to your life, consider liking the video and subscribing to join a community focused on optimizing metabolism, reducing inflammation, and improving long-term health naturally through science-based strategies. Because when you understand how your body truly works, you become far more empowered to protect your metabolism, reduce visceral fat naturally, and support healthier aging for decades to come.